Hello and welcome to the pod. I'm Nathan Fink.
I'm Jolyn Drennan, and this is New Hampshire Family Now,
a show about building family in the Granite State. Today in the show, Jolyn and I reminisce, do a little caroling, and later, Dr. Cassie Yackley joins us to talk child-parent psychotherapy and turning emotional response into choices. New Hampshire Family Now is brought to you by the New Hampshire Charitable Foundation. Since 1962, the Charitable Foundation has worked hand in hand with generous and visionary citizens to maximize the power of giving and support, collaborate, and lead innovative initiatives. Initiatives like New Hampshire Tomorrow, which is focused on making sure children and families have access to education, healthcare, and career pathways to ensure every family member thrives. To learn more about New Hampshire Charitable Foundation and all their initiatives, go to www.nhcf.org. This podcast was also brought to you by Family Support New Hampshire. Family Support New Hampshire is NH's coalition of family resource centers and family strengthening programs that exist to ensure Granite State families have access to resources so both caregivers and children can succeed, because supported families are strong families. To find a family resource center near you, visit www.fsnh.org. Hey, it's Nathan, co-host of New Hampshire Family Now. I wanted to take a quick break from the show because it occurred to me the other day that I've never asked you to subscribe to this podcast. Subscribing is free, and when you do it, it helps our placement algorithms, making it that much easier for caregivers across New Hampshire to find valuable information and strategies for their families. Also, you'll be alerted when a new episode drops. And if you like the show, leaving a review helps us that much more. So go to wherever you get your podcast, type in New Hampshire Family Now, and as the kids say, smash that subscribe button. I say click it, because if you smash it, then you're going to need a new one. Thank you and enjoy today's podcast. Hello and welcome to the podcast. I'm here with co-host Jolyn Drennan, and this is the season 2 finale. Can you believe it? It's the end of season 2 as we know it. This whole season! To think about 2 years ago, you and I decided to take our incredible, slightly toxic chemistry public. Now look at us. 2 years later, we're exactly where we started.
the same.
So, end of 2022, let's talk year in review. What brought you joy?
FSNH Leadership Retreat, hands down.
Yes.
2 days of fun with like our best work friends. And it was all of the directors of the Family Resource Centers from across the state, our whole staff coming together for team building, unwinding together. And it was just really cool, like the dynamic, like we built rafts and then we threw them in the water and we paddled the rafts. Yeah. And then it was just really cool to see everyone come together. And I was so happy, like, to be part of it. This system, but they're, it's people.
I'd be lying if I said watching you get launched into the water wasn't a joyful moment for me. So looking back then, 2022, what were you most proud of? I
think so I'm most proud, I think, of the relationships and the team that we have built across the state with, from all different sectors, like from, state leadership to the nonprofits that we work with, that we have this team of people that are dedicated to supporting families that are all working together in lockstep and just trying to, overcoming, whatever is put in front of us, we figure it out and we just push forward. So that is one thing. And then for like a specific project, I think I'm most proud of the Trestle Funds, an idea that was kind of prompted by New Hampshire Charitable Foundation, the funds to provide to the Family Resource Centers to support families directly, like with whatever acute needs that they needed, that they had. And just the impact of that project and how it brought communities together. It brought, it strengthened families. And then the data, of course, that we were able to gather out of that project. And then, we presented on this project nationally, and then we have other states reaching out to us.
What are you most looking forward to in 2023?
I think in 2023, I'm looking forward to building on the momentum that has been generated around the Family Resource Center network in the state, the investment in families, in supporting all families, and, just opportunities to really highlight the work that's going on in the state, and that there's all these really great initiatives, and that there's work actually happening to support families and enhance programs and services and families' access.
Yeah.
What are you looking forward to?
I think I am looking. What's that line from Elf? Singing loudly for all to hear.
Oh, yes.
Do you want to go caroling around the office?
Okay,
so what we're going to do is we'll start with Liz because she's always down for it.
That sounds great.
On the 12th day of Christmas, my true love gave to me COVID.
Do you want to sing with us?
I want a hippopotamus for Christmas. Only a hippopotamus will do. I don't want a doll, no dinky tinker toys. I want a hippopotamus to play with and enjoy. I don't know the words to the song. My hippopotamuses can be cruel, especially when they're in a lake in Africa.
Rum-pa-pum-pum. A newborn cliff to see. Rum-pa-pum-pum.
And when we come back, we have Dr. Cassie Yackley, Director of the Center for Trauma Responsive Practice Change. Don't go anywhere. Many thanks to New Hampshire's Office of Social and Emotional Wellness for sponsoring this podcast. Started within New Hampshire's Department of Education, the Office of Social and Emotional Wellness consolidates policy development and implements projects and programs that are focused on health and wellness with an emphasis on behavioral health of all students, youth, and families. To learn more about the Department of Education and its many programs and approaches, visit www.education.nh.gov. Today's show was also brought to you by the Children's Hospital at Dartmouth-Hitchcock and the Child Advocacy and Protection Program, a multidisciplinary program with the Children's Hospital established to evaluate and provide integrative care to suspected victims of child maltreatment. Together, a team of physicians, advanced practice registered nurses, social workers, nurses, and child life specialists work to provide consultation and evaluations of children who are suspected victims of abuse, so to serve in the best interest of children and families at multiple levels of prevention. For more information about Children's Hospital at Dartmouth-Hitchcock and the Child Advocacy Protection Program, visit www.chadkids.org/child-advocacy. Hello and welcome back to the podcast. Here with me for the second half of our season finale is Dr. Cassie Yackley, Director of the Center for Trauma Responsive Practice Change. Cassie, welcome back to the show.
Thanks so much for having me again.
No one comes back for a third time, so this might be goodbye. Well, first of all, you know that I'm a huge fan of your work and how it allows for personal growth of not only individuals, but in our relationships. But I wanted to start in this place where a while ago, I had the pleasure of sitting with Dr. Melissa Merrick, President and CEO of Prevent Child Abuse America. And we had this conversation around what we know is going on in our communities, the statistics around ACEs or adverse childhood experiences and trauma. And I could sense a frustration or maybe an opportunity in the way she talked about it, in that we know these things. So I guess my first question, since we know these things, what's out there to help folks who've experienced trauma or these ACEs and help us move forward?
Yeah, well, I think there's a really broad range now of things we can do at the community level, at the family level, at the individual level. But I do believe that helping families when their children are young is probably one of the most important things we can do, both for our communities and for our families. And so we do know the stats, and we know that oftentimes when people struggle with ACEs or adversity in childhood, that those things carry forward. And often they have some of those same struggles with their own children in their families. I've had the honor of working with so many people who have been in circumstances where there was trauma or challenges in their own families, and the opportunity to change that, to make it different in the life of your own child, is one of the most beautiful and empowering experiences a person can have. Child parent psychotherapy or CPP is about recognizing things that were hard in the past and the ways in which they might show up in our relationships in the present and keeping them there.
Now, let's start with that, because there is a reaction in me constantly against, and I don't know why, identifying past traumas.
Yeah.
Where it feels like the majority of my brain or frontal lobe or wherever this is happening, to be honest, is that I am so concerned with my present and trying to maintain an environment that I don't have maybe the emotional space to go back in time and identify and then purposefully or intentionally walk forward. So help me understand this. How do I understand how trauma has played in my experience in even a cursory way? How do I identify that? How do I know it's affecting my relationships? Where do I go?
Yeah. So I want to talk about this in two ways. Number one, it resonates for me as a parent. I know this, and I do the same thing as a mom, because we all have things that we wish our children didn't experience. And they do. And we're afraid to put language to it because we're hoping they didn't have those experiences that were a part of their lives. And I loved the way you started this as a parent. You said, well, it's in my brain or in my cortex. And that was a really key point, right, Nathan? Because when things are really stressful, when things are upsetting and overwhelming, our memory changes, right? We remember things in a different kind of way. Less thoughts, more emotion, more physiological experience. And the scarier or more upsetting and the more buried those things are, the more they're not connected to our thoughts at all. And that is exactly why you talk about the past, because it's not a visceral feeling, an emotion that plays out that it feels like it's my kid or my significant other. It's a prefrontal cortex thought that I feel icky and I remember that I felt icky in this situation and I have a choice. I have a choice of what I do with that emotion so that I'm not playing out in the same kind of ways these emotions that I had in the past.
Right.
So that is the crux of it, actually.
Yeah. So what I'm hearing is listening to the self and the reaction to understand when the reaction comes out of, say, that kind of logical sense and into that purely emotional fight or flight sense. And if I listen to that, I'm starting to pick up on something that I should address, I should think about.
Yeah. I like this example. I often, when I'm talking with people, have given the example of a child who learns they're hungry, and you have little guys. So you can just think about this process. When a kid is really young and they feel hungry, they do feel hungry. We have a sense of satiety, right? Physiological sense of I feel hungry when we're born. It's a survival mechanism, but they don't know what it is. You as a dad, when you're a loving dad and you're like, little dude, you're crying, you're upset. Maybe you need food. Maybe you're hungry. Well, that's a thought, right? That's a thought in our prefrontal cortex and our left cortex, a meaning-making thing. Oh, that thing is hungry. Well, unfortunately, you can't say to your little one right away, well, you're hungry, and then the next day he knows that. It takes time for those pathways to develop. But the more times we do that, and maybe you say you're hangry because there's emotions connected to our physiological experiences. Well, the more times you make that connection for your kiddo, the easier it is for them to know that. And one day, then they know I'm hungry, right? And they say to us, I'm hungry. Upsetting things aren't any different in our life like that, right? We have these, all of us have impinging emotions. If you've ever been driving in the car and you're like, all of a sudden, I'm upset. No trigger. I don't know why. I'm really upset. And you're trying to figure out, why am I upset? And if you can calm down.
I think that these experiences are so common, to us as adults and us as caregivers and parents, because we're looking at a way, I think, to better understand what has happened to us. And then while moving forward to create an environment that is safe, secure, and nurturing for children.
Exactly.
So how does something then like CPP or child parent psychotherapy, how does it provide a conversation, an environment in which a person like me can essentially move forward productively?
The partnership that we have with primary caregivers, the spending the time alone with them to think about in a structured way their early experiences and any emotions or reactions that they might have, and especially those that come up when we're with our kids, because most of those emotions are strong when we're with our own children. So part of it is parents having this chance to help understand and remember their past so that when it comes up in relationships, they know it's there. But the other part is this incredible shift about how they understand their children. I mean, we move away from this idea of changing a behavior to being very curious about what that behavior tells us about their own kid. And oftentimes when we know the statistics, it's often violence in our families and in our society. And in the case of violence, when a child is violent and you've had a history that has been violent in your own life, it's hard not to make predictions or worries about your own child and how that may play out. And that allows you to get that out of the way when you understand where it's coming from.
So functionally speaking then, CPP, how does it operate in a way that it allows me to, let's say this were a conversation, let's say we are in therapy. And I think this is critical to me because when I hear the word therapy or, child parent psychotherapy, I think not for me because I can't understand even the process by which it feels so foreign and out there.
Yeah. As a parent, you know you're the most important person in your child's life, and a therapist will never take that place. The role that you play, the importance you play, but also, frankly, the way you know your kid. And in CPP, we recognize that. I'm not here to help your child understand. I'm here to improve the understanding between you and your child. What is your child communicating through their play? Often, right? Not their words, because they're very young. In CPP, they're often kids that don't have their words under 6 years old or don't have the words to describe the kinds of experiences that they've had. And so we're acting as a bridge. We're acting as a conduit between the child and the caregiver, helping to communicate what they're observing in their child and the upsetting or confusing behaviors that their child has. And for the child, we're helping them understand how much their parent loves them, how much they desire to keep them safe, even if things haven't been safe in the past, so that we can restore a protective, as you said, and a safe shield, so that moving forward, when we're not there, the parent has the skills to play with their child and understand through their child's behavior what they're trying to communicate and to help them feel safe in those very moments. So we're giving it away.
Right. All of a sudden I started to think about the way my sons and all children, the way that they behave is a method of communication.
Yes.
So it's constant. It's a feedback loop, but there's a perception, for me, that children were born empty vessels, right? This is kind of our fill them up with this, and they will only be the things that you put into them, which in many cases that's true. But that empty vessel kind of metaphor makes me, when I look at them, it does something to the way that I approach the fact that they have behaviors that run against the behaviors I wish they had in certain circumstances. And so I'd love for you to help me demystify this idea of behavior as communication, behavior as, that feedback loop that parents can essentially tap into to understand what's happening.
Yeah, I do believe that all humans misbehave, if you will, because things aren't going right or they have emotions or experiences that they don't understand. So you have to start with the premise that kids aren't manipulative or attention seeking or evil or purposely aggressive at that age, or any of the diagnoses in many cases that we give to very young children, bipolar disorder, oppositional defiant disorder. We have to move away from thinking of pathology and beginning to understand that child, as you said, is just developing, not an empty vessel, right? We have temperament, and that's a part of the mix, and figuring out how our temperament fits with our kids' temperament. But then, yes, those experiences shape and form based on that temperament who they are, for good and for bad. And I just think even the stance of curiosity is very different in a relationship, as you started, when we're not accusing or pointing fingers or assuming any malintent, then oftentimes we're more open in that relationship. We're softer, we're more receptive. And it is about attunement, right? How each of us are reading each other, reading where the other person's at, hopefully adjusting accordingly how we're interacting. And when we're good at that, when we are sensitive to each other and we adjust how we behave, whether you're a little kid or not, that feels safer. We want to be with each other more.
Exactly. When you work to understand each other's behavior. I had this experience with my son who has ADHD and it can be sensory seeking, realizing that his head and his hands were in two different places.
Yeah.
And I used to scold him for that. And then there was this, through some coaching, this realization that behavior is not intentional. And it's changed our relationship.
It is so amazing. Just from the moment our kids are born, how much of our own expectations and beliefs and experiences pour into our child. I've sat with people who will literally say, I knew the minute he or she or they were born, I knew the minute they were born, they had an attitude. The moment they were born, right? And the same attitude I had. So we all have expectations for what kids are going to be like based on our own experiences of being a kid and based on what our own parents were like. And we have a varying degree of awareness of how much that comes into the relationships with our children.
It is so true because, and I think about that with both of our sons. The second one, it was the expectation was gone because the first one was so counter. We thought we were going to get this little snuggle bug that, all these visions of just having this child on our chest who from birth was a squirmer, didn't really like to be held.
Yes.
Unless he was falling asleep. And you think about that vision of having a child, and my wife Jen will attest to this.
But that could be, now just stay with that for a minute. What if you and Jen, every time he was restless and didn't want to snuggle, thought, he doesn't really like us?
Interesting.
My most personal, my best understanding of what we're talking about, the way in which these really early experiences can impact us as in our closest relationships. I was adopted at birth. I was adopted at 4 days, and good parents, but I was in a hospital for 4 days, which are really important period of time as young kids are born into the world. And I spent a lot of my early life struggling in relationships, being afraid of being abandoned in some kind of way. My family had their own struggles as well. They're no longer with me, but it took me a long time and a failed marriage to figure out when that comes up. And no, it isn't pleasant to think about, and it isn't the most favorable quality that I want to share with people, but it's real. And it allows me, when it happens in relationships to this point in my 50s, to pause and say, is it that sense, or is it something true to this relationship? And that makes a big difference in relationships.
It certainly does. I think there's a heightened awareness these days about the way we're talking about these experiences, traumatic experiences and things like that, especially with children.
Yeah.
In fact, the recent book that came out with Dr. Bruce Perry and Oprah Winfrey, in case you didn't know which Oprah I was talking about.
I wouldn't have guessed.
It's this idea of talking about what happened to you rather than what's wrong with you.
It's really quite amazing, right? Why Oprah had Dr. Perry on. And I will say that it really does speak to what we're talking about. So I spent a couple of years during the pandemic in my downtime training with Dr. Perry to become certified in the neurosequential model of therapeutics, or NMT, we like our initials. And it's really cool. They call it neuroarchaeology. If you could think about our history, right, and the parts of our brain that grow historically, there's a timetable for those things. And when we have two things, it's a teeter-totter. We think we talked about this before, right? It's adversities that we have in our life in balance with supportive relationships, caregivers, whoever those points are. But if you look at somebody's history, especially early on, 0 to 5, when most of our brain growth happens, 0 to 3, right? The vast majority. Well, if we look back at a child's life and perhaps they were put into foster care or had to go with an alternative caregiver for a period of time early on, or a caregiver got really sick, right? Or they were in the hospital really early on. There are ways to then move forward and understand how that's impacted their autonomic nervous system functioning. Hyperarousal, hyperactivity, feeling like you need to disappear or avoid things. And what's really cool about this approach is when you can map this out and see it in a color-coded brain map, which we do, you can target those. Not just as an individual, I can target it as a psychologist, so can the school, so can the pediatrician or the OT. And the brain likes repetition. That's why relationships are so incredibly powerful. You need lots of repetition for our brain to grow in beautiful new ways.
So you're saying by a heat map, you can actually understand kind of the parts of the brain that are either active or hyperactive. And so then through your therapist, OT, whatever, you can actually move that, I want to say muscle.
Exactly like that. To build a muscle, it's a lot of repetition.
But to build then a neural pathway that corresponds to a behavior pathway?
Yes. And I would say the broadest stroke to take with this is, let's just think about the amount of upset in the bottom of our brain, as you were talking about before, our brain stem and our diencephalon. When we have scary, stressful events in our lives, it's very active, right? And we know that when that's very active, often it's disconnected from the prefrontal cortex, executive function, thinking part of our brain. So often when I'm doing an NMT evaluation of a kid, I don't have to ask anything of them. All I have to do is look at all their history and all the evaluations we've done in the past and how they function today.
Right.
And we're looking at how active is the bottom of the brain, how excited, I guess, is the bottom of the brain compared to how in control the top of the brain is. How much control are we able to tell ourselves, knock it off, sit still? And often when there's been a lot of early upset or a lot of trauma, that bottom of the brain dysregulation, as you would say, is far stronger than the top of the brain. There's no capacity to get that thinking part on the brain to tell yourself to make a different choice in the moment. And I think that's one of the biggest misunderstandings of trauma, is that people are making a purposeful choice to behave, if you will, in the way that they are, especially because oftentimes they know these things in other settings. I work with school people and they'll say, well, this kid knows the zones of regulation. He knows when his engine runs high, but he won't use it. Because we're in moments of distress, by definition, you can't use it. You can't get access to it. And that's another reason why talking about hard things, right, builds that muscle. It builds the connection between I feel upset and my thoughts can come in and provide reason to what's happening to me in this moment. And like getting hungry, the more times you do that, the more you recognize this upset.
So it's interesting because we've got all of this science, and yet the very idea of a basic question, what happened to you versus what's wrong with you, seems to be now book worthy. Do you see? And it's one so simple and one so we have this, all of this science. What is blocking us and keeping us at just changing from what's wrong with you to what happened to you?
In the trauma land, we talk a lot about shame and blame, that shame is a difficult emotion, which is tied to often a sense of worthlessness or lack of hopefulness, which nobody wants to walk toward. And when we're uncomfortable, we often want to find some place to put it, somebody to blame for that. And the reality is sometimes the behaviors we're talking about are not easy behaviors. It's much easier to blame an individual and think that they are making a purposeful choice to act in that way than to hold our own sense of responsibility for the society we're embedded in. Those are very hard for us, I think, as adults and people in the world to sit with and to recognize that we're all going to have a piece in changing the way our world looks for young children and families. You know, we're talking about what a lot of people would say is a hard topic or maybe even a depressing or a sad topic. But I honestly don't find it to be so whatsoever, because what you said, actually now we do know what to do. We understand the brain science and we have ways of intervening and approaching this that we know work for even families with the most challenging circumstances around violence and substance use. We know that things like CPP have been proven through randomized control trials, the biggest standard of evidence that demonstrate for us that, yes, if I'm a family and I come to a person to see you with CPP, that I can expect those same outcomes. I can expect that I feel more competent as a parent. I can expect that I don't struggle with depression or PTSD in the way I used to. I can expect that my kid doesn't have PTSD as they grow up. I can expect that the behavior problems that my child had can go away. And that's a real sense of hope. And as we said before, not only can those caregivers know that the struggles they had and they had with their child in the relationship, they know that any generational problems that happen won't be repeated. It'll stop with their generation.
You've got me. I'm getting CPP for every one of my family members this holiday season. Quite seriously, though, how do I do that? Like, this is so revolutionary. I want to take a training. I want to go to a conference. Are there things coming up? What can I do if I want to learn more about this?
I think there are a couple different layers in which we can get involved. First, I would say for anybody out there who is a mental health clinician, we invite you to join us. The CPP Provider Network now has about 143 mental health clinicians across our state at about 41 agencies. I think those folks that come in contact with families that know that they could benefit can certainly look up CPP in New Hampshire at our website at www.nhchildparentpsychotherapy.com. On there, we list the providers and people can make connections. But for all of us out there, all of our cross-system partners that are working with children and families, we're going to have an amazing conference in January to think about how we better serve kids under 6 across our systems, early child care programs, mental health, doctors, and child welfare included. We'll be meeting on January 12th. Dr. Julie LaRue from Tulane University is going to join us to help us understand young children that are involved in child welfare and the very critical need to avoid displacements of where they're at, movements in child care, movements across foster placement or to different caregivers. And so I think that would be a great opportunity to learn more about it and also to think about how people can play a role in helping families access CPP.
Cassie, thank you so much for joining the podcast. It's a pleasure. I look forward to seeing you again to talk about more things.
I'm shooting for a third, Nathan.
Many thanks to the Samuel P. Hunt Foundation for sponsoring this podcast. Established in 1951, Samuel P. Hunt Foundation is a Manchester-based, independent nonprofit that provides grants primarily for the arts, children and youth services, faith-based organizations, educational institutions, healthcare, and human services. This podcast was brought to you by Nixon Peabody, who delivers exceptional legal services for clients in the community by combining high performance, an entrepreneurial spirit, deep engagement, and an unwavering commitment to a culture of collaboration, diversity, and humanity. Nixon Peabody works with universities, hospitals, and nonprofits of every size to maximize impact. For more information, visit nixonpeabody.com. New Hampshire Family Now is listed on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Google Podcasts, Amazon Music, Stitcher, iHeartRadio, and more. Listen wherever you get your podcasts or ask your smart speaker to play New Hampshire Family Now.